from South Carolina, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who, after meeting with the president Friday, urged him to use his executive powers to build the wall. Senator, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thank you.
This week, you first tried to arrange a compromise, a border wall funding in return for some protection for the Dreamers. The White House said no.
Right.
Now, you are telling the president, urging the president to use his executive powers to fund the wall, and the president on Friday said not so fast. Question, what is the president's strategy?
Well, I just talked to him about 30 minutes ago. He says, let's make a deal. They did not turn down Wall for the Bridge Act. That's not that storyline. I tried to see if we could open up the government for a limited period of time to negotiate a deal, and the president says, let's make a deal, then open up the government. Nancy Pelosi says, even if you opened up the government, I wouldn't fund a wall, so that's why I'm depressed. You know, there's not much talk about what she said. She's telling the president, even if you open up the government, I'm not going to do a deal on the wall, and that's a non-starter for the president.
Well, and I don't mean in any way to cast aspersions on the president or Nancy Pelosi, but you know one of the definitions of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. What's going to go on? Right. The president says make a deal. The Democrats say not on, not funding for the wall. Not saying who's right or wrong, but what happens?
Well, I think it just plays out. What bothers me so much is that your next guest, Chris Coons, a great guy. We could sit down and make a deal with him, wall plus DACA, wall plus TPS. Every Democrat that I've worked with for about 10 years now has agreed to funding for barriers/walls on Obama's watch, on Bush's watch, and all of a sudden it's a bad thing on Trump's watch. It really does perplex me how you expect this to end when you tell the President of the United States you can't get it. You get $1 for a wall, when in the past Democrats have appropriated billions for the wall. What is he supposed to do? Just give in? He's not going to give in.
He's not going to give in. He said in a tweet, I believe it was yesterday, that he has a plan. What's the plan?
The plan is to do a deal. He is willing, in my view, to do wall plus. Funding for the wall that we desperately need, that's been done in the past. See if we can do a deal around the TPS recipients.
Those are temporary
who are going to lose their legal status.
Let me just say, temporary protected status, people who came in from disasters.
Thank you. Yeah, they're about 400,000. They're going to lose their legal status soon. He's willing to extend that. The DACA recipients, they're all tied up in court, but I think he would give them work permits for 3 years, one-time renewable, if he could get wall funding. I don't want to speak for the president. I don't want to lock him in, but I'm confident what I just described with a few other things would be a deal acceptable to the White House and a lot of Democrats, and I'm just so frustrated we can't get in a room and hammer it out.
Now, some White House officials, as it's been reported, are now talking about, well, maybe the president will be using his State of the Union speech to make this case. That's 16 days from now. Some White House officials are talking about this extending into February. How much damage does that do if this government shutdown goes on for weeks, even into next month?
Less damage than if we don't fix a broken immigration system. You got two bad choices here. Continue the stalemate and see parts of the government shut down. It will be inconvenient and it can create problems. And to the federal workforce, I'm sorry you're caught up in this mess. But the real damage is people coming across the border, selling drugs, killing Americans. That needs to come to the end. So the real damage is a broken border compared to a partial shutdown. The president's not going to give in. No wall, no deal, but he's ready to deal. And your next guest, I am sure, would provide funding for a barrier where it made sense if you could get something for it.
You have been one of the loudest voices among Republicans urging the president to declare a national emergency. Two questions. One, why doesn't he just go ahead and do that? He seems to think that's a way out of this. Secondly, there are a lot of your GOP colleagues who say that would be a terrible precedent because someday there's going to be a Democratic president, and they're going to say, well, you know what, it's a national emergency, so let's fund climate change. It's going to be a national emergency, so let's fund income inequality.
Well, let's start with the president. I asked him, Mr. President, if you want to go down the emergency path, I stand with you. He said just 30 minutes ago, that's my last option. I think the legislative route is the best way to go. Let's make a deal, but I'll do it if I had to. So we have found in the past presidents declared emergencies for different things. I am going to support him. Before he pulls the plug on the legislative option, and I think we're almost there, I would urge him to open up the government for a short period of time, like 3 weeks, before he pulls the plug, see if we can get a deal. If we can at the end of 3 weeks, all bets are off. See if he can do it by himself through the emergency powers. That's my recommendation. But I think the legislative path is just about shut off because Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the House, said, even if you open up the government, I'll give you $1 for the wall. As long as that's the case, we're never going to get a legislative package, no matter what the Senate does.
I want to just pursue this emergency option one more time because in 2014, President Obama used his executive powers to try to protect 5 million immigrants. And here's what you said at the time.
Right.
This is wrong, it's irresponsible, and will do damage to our efforts to fix a broken immigration system. This is a tremendous presidential overreach.
So why was that an overreach for President Obama then, but not for President Trump now?
Well, what President Obama did, he didn't declare a national emergency about the DACA recipients. He took his power to pardon an individual or a small group and applied it to 1.8 million people. Every president, not every, a lot of presidents have declared emergencies. After 9/11 we did, and they've taken money and powers to deal with a national emergency. I think there is a crisis at the border. I think it fits the definition of a national emergency. It's the last option, not the first option, but we're pretty close to that being the only option. How do you negotiate with the Speaker of the House when she tells you, even if you open up the government, I'm not going to give you but $1 for the wall? So until that changes, there's not much left except the national emergency approach. And to my Republican colleagues, stand behind the president if this is his last option. He ran on this as a centerpiece of his presidency, and it is a crisis. And if you don't see the crisis, you're not looking very hard.
Okay, I want to switch subjects on you. The New York Times now reports that after President Trump fired FBI Director James Comey, that the Bureau opened up a counterintelligence investigation into whether or not the President of the United States was working on behalf of the Russians. One, did you know about that? Two, what do you think of, I have to say, it's an astonishing idea, the FBI, the Bureau, investigating whether the President was a Russian agent.
Well, number one, that story came from somebody who leaked it with an agenda. So I'd like to know who leaked it because they have an agenda not very friendly to President Trump. And I, for one, don't trust what I read in the New York Times. Having said all that, I'm going to ask the FBI director, was there a counterintelligence investigation opened up regarding the president as being a potential agent of the Russians? I find it astonishing. And to me, it tells me a lot about the people running the FBI, McCabe and that crowd. I don't trust them as far as I throw them. So if this really did happen, Congress needs to know about it. And what I want to do is make sure, how could the FBI do that? What kind of checks and balances are there?
You have a lot of clout in asking the FBI questions because you're the new chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Congratulations, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Your committee is going to begin holding confirmation hearings this week on the president's nomination of William Barr to be the new Attorney General. What do you intend to ask him about the special counsel investigation and whether or not the special counsel is going to be allowed to finish his investigation and issue a full, unedited report to Congress?
I'm going to ask him, do you see any reason to fire Mr. Mueller based on what you know now for cause? Do you trust Mr. Mueller to be fair to the president and the country? Will you make sure he can finish his job? If you get the report, will you be as transparent as possible? I've asked him those questions, and I'm very comfortable with his answers. I think he'd be a great Attorney General. Great job by the president to pick Mr. Barr. I see no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, but that'll be up to Mr. Mueller to make his report to Attorney General Barr, and he soon will, I hope.
Another question for the new chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg this week after cancer surgery for the first time, astonishingly, in her quarter century on the court, missed oral arguments. Now, we all wish her a speedy recovery. The doctors say that she is cancer-free, but there are reports that the White House has begun reviewing a possible short list of candidates to replace her. As the chair of the committee that would vote on a replacement, have you given any thought how you prevent this from becoming a political circus?
Well, number one, I wish her well and hope she recovers and continues to serve for many years. But here's what will happen if there's a vacancy, no matter from the liberal wing of the court. There'll be a lot of pushback from the left. But my Democratic colleagues felt when they were in charge, we should confirm judges by a majority vote. They changed the rules to accommodate President Obama. They tried to stack the court. They never thought Clinton would lose. So what you're going to have is Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer's desire to stack the court on their Democratic watch has come back to haunt them. If there is an opening, whether it's Ginsburg or anybody else, I will urge the president to nominate a qualified conservative, and hopefully those people will get through. That person will get through, and I expect it to be along party lines. And this is what happens when you change the rules. This has come back to bite them. I predicted it would, and we'll see. I hope Justice Ginsburg serves for a long time, but if there's an opening on this court, I'm going to be hell-bent to put a conservative to replace whoever steps down for whatever reason.
And just finally, and I got about 30 seconds left, if you've got Donald Trump, and again, this is if, you have Donald Trump replacing a liberal icon like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, isn't that a formula for, I mean, doesn't that make the Kavanaugh hearings look like a Tea Party?
They should have thought of that before they changed the rules. They tried to destroy conservative judges. I voted for Sotomayor and Kagan, understanding what I was getting. So this decision by Reid and Schumer may come back to haunt them, but I am dead set on making sure it is a conservative nominee. And elections have consequences. The rules of the Senate were changed not by me, by them, and we had to do it on the Supreme Court because they would not give us any votes to nominate anybody. And Kavanaugh was a fine man. They tried to destroy him. All this is going to come back to haunt them one day.
Yeah, let me just real quickly explain that when the Democrats were Majority Leader Reid changed it for judicial nominees short of the Supreme Court and for cabinet appointees went from the 60-vote margin to 51, and then the Republicans did it for the Supreme Court. Senator Graham, thank you. Thanks for your time.
Can I just say one last thing?
Yes, sir.
One last thing. We don't need one Democrat to replace a liberal justice. And the reason that's the case is because what Harry Reid did, what he set in motion.
Always good to speak with you, sir.